What would you do if everyone around you treated you like you didn't belong, simply because of how you looked? What if the very people meant to respect your service instead chose to humiliate you in front of others? Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest burden of honor. Sometimes the most decorated hero is hiding in plain sight, wearing a uniform that others mistake for weakness. This is the story of a woman whose appearance deceived everyone around her until one moment changed everything forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as soldiers filed into the mess hall for their 0630 breakfast formation. Among them walked Private Sarah Chun, her combat boots making soft sounds against the concrete as she moved with the measured pace of someone who had learned that being noticed often meant being targeted. Her uniform hung slightly loose on her small frame, the fabric seeming to swallow her petite build. At barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing no more than 110 pounds, she looked more like someone who had wandered onto a military base by accident than a soldier who belonged there. The other soldiers barely acknowledged her presence as she took her place in line. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, another body filling a spot in formation. Her quiet demeanor and soft-spoken voice when she occasionally answered direct questions had earned her a reputation as timid, perhaps even fragile. The seasoned soldiers assumed she was probably counting down the days until she could return to civilian life, maybe to some desk job where her small stature wouldn't matter. What none of them knew was that Sarah Chun had been awake since 0400 hours, not because she struggled with military routine, but because she used those quiet pre-dawn hours for something deeply personal. In the privacy of her small quarters, she had carefully cleaned and polished a small metal object that she kept hidden in a locked box beneath her bed. The ritual was methodical, reverent, each motion practiced through months of repetition. She would hold the object up to the light, checking every detail, ensuring it remained pristine despite being stored away from view. The metal was her most treasured possession, but also her most carefully guarded secret. Its weight was both literal and metaphorical, carrying with it memories that she wasn't ready to share with anyone at Fort Braxton. The intricate metalwork caught the light in ways that reminded her of another time, another place when her actions had meant the difference between life and death for people who would never know her name. Drill Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez noticed Sarah for all the wrong reasons that first week. At 6 feet 4 inches tall with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could be heard across 3 football fields, Rodriguez was everything that Sarah appeared not to be. He had earned his position through 15 years of exemplary service, multiple deployments, and a reputation for turning soft civilians into hardened soldiers. His methods were loud, aggressive, and designed to break down individual weakness, to build collective strength. Rodriguez had developed what he considered a keen eye for identifying soldiers who wouldn't make it through their first deployment. In his experience, the quiet ones were usually the first to crack under pressure. The small ones often lacked the physical presence necessary for combat effectiveness. And soldiers who seemed to be hiding something were almost always hiding some weakness or inadequacy that would surface when lives depended on their performance. Sarah Chun checked every box on his mental list of problematic recruits. Her silence during group discussions wasn't seen as thoughtful restraint, but as evidence that she had nothing valuable to contribute. Her careful, precise movements weren't recognized as discipline deficiency, but as the nervous energy of someone trying too hard to avoid making mistakes. When she completed physical training exercises without complaint or fanfare, Rodriguez interpreted this as barely meeting minimum standards rather than exceeding them with room to spare. The first direct confrontation came during a routine uniform inspection. Rodriguez moved down the line of soldiers with practiced efficiency, finding minor flaws that he would address with sharp criticism designed to motivate improvement. Loose threads, scuffed boots, improperly aligned insignia. Each imperfection became a teaching moment delivered at maximum volume. The other soldiers had learned to stand perfectly still and accept whatever criticism came their way, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. When Rodriguez stopped in front of Sarah, his expression shifted to something closer to disgust than disappointment. Her uniform was actually immaculate by any reasonable standard. Every crease was sharp, every button properly aligned, every piece of equipment positioned exactly according to regulations. But Rodriguez wasn't looking at the technical compliance. He was looking at how the uniform fit her small frame, how the standard issue clothing seemed to diminish rather than enhance her military bearing. "Chun," Rodriguez barked, his voice echoing off the barracks walls. "What exactly do you think you're wearing?" Sarah kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her voice steady and respectful when she replied. "My dress uniform, drill sergeant." "That's not a uniform, that's a costume," Rodriguez continued, his tone growing more aggressive. "You look like a kid playing dress-up in her father's clothes. How do you expect anyone to take you seriously when you can't even fill out a uniform properly?" The other soldiers remained perfectly still, but Sarah could feel their attention focused on the exchange. This was the kind of public humiliation that would follow her for weeks, creating a narrative about her inadequacy that would be difficult to overcome. She had experienced similar moments before, in other places, with other authority figures who had made the same fundamental error in judgment. Rodriguez wasn't finished. He stepped closer, using his considerable height advantage to loom over her small frame. "Tell me, Chun, what makes you think you belong here? What makes you think you have what it takes to be a soldier? Because from where I'm standing, I see someone who's going to get people killed when the real shooting starts." The accusation hit deeper than Rodriguez could have known. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign that his words had found their mark. Getting people killed was indeed something she thought about, but not in the way Rodriguez imagined. She thought about the people she had saved, the lives that had been preserved because of her actions when the real shooting had already started. She thought about teammates who had gone home to their families because someone who looked exactly like she did now had been in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. But explaining any of that would require revealing things she wasn't ready to discuss. So instead, she maintained her military bearing and gave the only response that the situation allowed. "No excuse, drill sergeant," Rodriguez interpreted her response as admission of guilt rather than disciplined restraint. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In his mind, he had identified a weak link in his unit, someone who needed to be either strengthened through aggressive correction or removed before she could negatively impact the other soldiers. He made a mental note to pay special attention to Chun's performance, to document her failures, and to build a case for why she might not be suitable for military service. What Rodriguez failed to notice was the reaction of the other soldiers during this exchange. While most kept their expressions carefully neutral, a few had begun to pay closer attention to Sarah in the days following the public humiliation. They noticed that her responses to criticism were always measured and appropriate, never defensive or emotional. They observed that she completed every assigned task without complaint or request for assistance. Most significantly, they began to recognize that her quietness wasn't timidity, but something else entirely. Specialist Jennifer Walsh, a communications expert from Oregon who had been in the military for 3 years, started watching Sarah more carefully during training exercises. Walsh had grown up in a military family and had learned to recognize the difference between soldiers who were struggling and soldiers who were holding back. Sarah Chun was definitely holding back, but the question was why. During a particularly challenging physical training session, Walsh noticed that Sarah completed every exercise with what appeared to be relative ease, but she never pushed herself to obviously exceed the minimum requirements. When other soldiers struggled with heavy equipment carries, Sarah would complete her own tasks and then quietly assist others without drawing attention to herself. When navigation exercises left some soldiers confused and disoriented, Sarah always seemed to know exactly where she was, but would wait for others to figure out the route rather than taking the lead. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Sarah Chun was capable of more than she was showing, but she seemed deliberately committed to remaining unremarkable. Walsh began to wonder what kind of experience would teach someone to hide their capabilities so effectively. In her own military experience, soldiers usually wanted to stand out, to prove themselves, to earn recognition for their abilities. Sarah's approach was the opposite, almost as if she was trying to avoid attention rather than attract it. Rodriguez, however, saw none of these subtleties. His focus remained fixed on what he perceived as Sarah's obvious inadequacies. During weapons training, he would position himself where he could observe her performance and provide loud commentary designed to highlight her shortcomings. When Sarah handled her rifle with quiet competence, Rodriguez would criticize her stance or her grip, suggesting that someone of her size couldn't possibly manage the weapon effectively. "Chun," he would call out during marksmanship practice, "try not to let that rifle knock you over when it fires. Maybe we should get you something more your size, like a BB gun." The other soldiers would chuckle nervously, uncertain whether they were supposed to find Rodriguez's comments amusing or uncomfortable. Sarah would simply adjust her position slightly and continue with the exercise, her expression never changing, her performance never wavering. She would fire assigned rounds, clean her weapon properly, and move on to the next task without comment or complaint. What Rodriguez couldn't see from his position was the tight grouping of Sarah's shots on the target downrange. While other soldiers produced patterns that scattered across the target face, Sarah's bullets consistently found their mark with precision that bordered on mechanical. The range safety officer, Sergeant First Class David Kim, had noticed this pattern but assumed it was simply beginner's luck or the result of careful adherence to basic marksmanship principles. Kim had been running training ranges for 8 years and had seen thousands of soldiers learn to shoot. Most new soldiers started with wild, scattered shot groups that gradually improved with practice and instruction. A few natural shooters would show early promise, producing better patterns than their experience level would suggest. But Sarah Chun's shooting was different. Her shot groups weren't just good for a beginner. They were good by any standard, displaying a level of consistency that usually took years to develop. During one particularly memorable range session, Kim decided to test his observation by giving Sarah more challenging shooting scenarios. Instead of the standard stationary targets at known distances, he set up a series of targets at varying ranges, some partially concealed, requiring shooters to estimate distance and adjust for different conditions. Most soldiers struggled with these exercises, requiring multiple attempts and considerable coaching to achieve acceptable results. Sarah approached each target with the same methodical calm she brought to everything else. She would study the target briefly, make small adjustments to her position and sight picture, and then fire a single shot. Each bullet found its mark with an accuracy that Kim found remarkable. When he checked her targets after the exercise, he discovered that her shots weren't just hitting the target zones, they were consistently striking within inches of each other, demonstrating a level of precision that exceeded many experienced soldiers. Kim approached Sarah after the range session, curiosity overcoming his usual professional restraint. "Chun, have you had shooting experience before enlisting?" Sarah's response was carefully measured, as always. "Some, Sergeant, family hunting trips when I was younger." The answer was technically true, but deliberately incomplete. Sarah had indeed learned to shoot during family trips, but those trips had involved much more than casual hunting. Her father, a former Marine sniper, had recognized his daughter's natural ability early and had spent years developing her skills with the same methodical precision that the military would later value. By the time she was 16, Sarah could consistently hit targets at ranges that challenged experienced marksmen. But explaining the full extent of her background would lead to questions about why someone with advanced shooting skills was serving as a basic infantryman rather than in a specialized marksman role. Those questions would lead to discussions about her previous military service, her combat experience, and ultimately to the events that had earned her the medal she kept hidden in her quarters. Sarah wasn't ready for those conversations, so she maintained the fiction that her abilities were simply the result of childhood recreational shooting. Rodriguez, who had been observing the range session from a distance, interpreted Kim's conversation with Sarah differently. In his mind, any attention paid to Chun was likely the result of her failing to meet basic standards and requiring additional instruction. He made a mental note to speak with Kim about Chun's performance, assuming that the range sergeant was documenting problems that would support Rodriguez's assessment of her unsuitability for military service. The disconnect between Sarah's actual performance and Rodriguez's perception of her abilities created an increasingly tense situation. Rodriguez continued to single her out for criticism and public humiliation, while Sarah continued to exceed every objective standard while maintaining her carefully constructed facade of unremarkable competence. The other soldiers began to notice the disparity, creating undercurrents of confusion and speculation within the unit. Specialist Walsh decided to approach Sarah directly during a rare moment when they were both alone in the barracks. Sarah was sitting on her bunk, reading a technical manual about radio communications with the same focused attention that she brought to every task. Walsh noticed that Sarah was reading at a pace that suggested familiarity with the material, rather than struggling to understand new concepts. "Mind if I ask you something?" Walsh said, settling onto the adjacent bunk. Sarah looked up from her manual, her expression politely attentive. "Of course. Rodriguez has been giving you a hard time, but I've been watching your performance. You're not struggling the way he seems to think you are. Actually, you're performing better than most of us. So what's really going on?" The question was direct enough that Sarah couldn't deflect it with technical responses or military protocols. She studied Walsh's face, trying to assess whether this was genuine curiosity or some kind of test. After a moment, she closed her manual and gave a response that was honest within carefully defined limits. "I find it easier to keep a low profile. Drawing attention isn't always beneficial." Walsh nodded slowly, recognizing that there was much more to this story than Sarah was willing to share. "Fair enough. But you should know that some of us have noticed you're not the weak link Rodriguez thinks you are. If you ever need backup, you're not as alone as you might think." The offer of support was unexpected and touched something in Sarah that she had been keeping carefully guarded. For months, she had maintained emotional distance from her fellow soldiers, partly for operational security reasons and partly as protection against forming attachments that might complicate her mission. But Walsh's straightforward offer of friendship, without demanding explanations in return, represented exactly the kind of authentic, human connection that Sarah had been missing. "Thank you," Sarah replied, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, her smile reached her eyes. "That means more than you know." Rodriguez's campaign against Sarah intensified over the following weeks. He seemed to interpret her continued presence in the unit as a personal challenge to his authority and judgment. His criticisms became more creative and more public, designed not just to correct perceived deficiencies, but to establish a clear narrative about Sarah's unsuitability for military service. During equipment inspections, Rodriguez would spend extra time examining Sarah's gear, looking for any minor flaw that he could amplify into evidence of incompetence. He would hold up items of her equipment for the entire unit to see, pointing out imaginary problems or interpreting normal wear as evidence of poor maintenance. when Sarah's equipment was actually in better condition than most other soldiers. Rodriguez would shift his criticism to her appearance, her posture, or her attitude. "Look at this, everyone," Rodriguez announced during one memorable inspection, holding up Sarah's perfectly maintained rifle. "Chun here thinks that just because her weapon looks clean, that means she knows how to use it. But cleaning a rifle and firing a rifle are two completely different skills. Any civilian can make metal shine. It takes a real soldier to put rounds on target when it matters." The implicit challenge in his statement was obvious to everyone present. Rodriguez was suggesting that Sarah's technical competence with equipment maintenance didn't translate to actual combat effectiveness. He was also setting up a scenario where Sarah's abilities could be publicly tested and, in his mind, publicly demonstrated to be inadequate. Sarah recognized the trap that was being constructed around her. Rodriguez was building towards some kind of public demonstration where he could prove his point about her inadequacy in front of the entire unit. She could deflect or avoid such a confrontation, but doing so would only reinforce his narrative about her weakness. Alternatively, she could accept the challenge and risk revealing more about her capabilities than she was prepared to discuss. The decision was complicated by her growing connection to the other soldiers in her unit. Walsh's offer of friendship had opened the door to relationships that Sarah was beginning to value. She found herself caring about the opinions and welfare of people who were starting to see her as a person rather than just another face in formation. The thought of disappointing them or allowing Rodriguez's false narrative to define her was becoming increasingly difficult to accept. But revealing her true capabilities would require explaining how she had acquired them, and that explanation would ultimately lead to discussions about combat service that she wasn't emotionally prepared to handle. The metal hidden in her quarters represented experiences that she was still processing, events that had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Using those experiences to silence Rodriguez's criticism felt like cheapening the sacrifice and service that the metal represented. Rodriguez's next target became Sarah's physical fitness performance. During group physical training sessions, he would position himself to observe her closely, looking for signs of struggle or fatigue that he could use to support his arguments about her inadequacy. Sarah's strategy of completing exercises without exceeding minimum requirements meant that Rodriguez could technically criticize her performance even when she met all objective standards. "Chun," Rodriguez called out during a challenging obstacle course exercise, "you're moving like you're afraid of breaking a nail. This isn't a beauty pageant, it's military training. If you can't handle a simple obstacle course, how do you expect to handle combat?" Sarah completed each obstacle with efficient, economical movements that conserved energy while meeting time requirements. Her approach was methodical rather than spectacular, practical rather than showy. To observers who understood physical fitness and tactical movement, her performance demonstrated excellent body awareness and efficient energy management. But Rodriguez interpreted her lack of unnecessary effort as evidence of inadequacy. The other soldiers were beginning to recognize the unfairness of Rodriguez's treatment, but military hierarchy made it difficult for them to intervene directly. Criticizing a drill sergeant's methods or judgment could result in disciplinary action that would affect their own careers and assignments. However, several soldiers began finding subtle ways to show support for Sarah, offering assistance with tasks you didn't need help with, including her in conversations she might otherwise have remained outside of, and generally treating her as a valued member of the team rather than a burden. These small gestures of solidarity didn't go unnoticed by Sarah, who was surprised by how much they meant to her. She had expected to complete her assignment at Fort Braxton in isolation, maintaining professional relationships without developing personal connections. Instead, she found herself becoming part of a community that was willing to support her despite not understanding her full background or capabilities. Sergeant Kim continued to observe Sarah's performance during range sessions with growing curiosity and admiration. Her shooting remained consistently excellent, but she seemed determined to avoid any attention or recognition for her abilities. When other soldiers requested coaching or assistance with their marksmanship, Sarah would occasionally offer quiet suggestions that invariably improved their performance. Her advice was always technically sound and practically effective, suggesting experience that went far beyond recreational hunting. Kim began to suspect that Sarah was deliberately underplaying her abilities for reasons he couldn't understand. During one range session, he decided to test this theory by giving her a more challenging exercise without announcing it as a test. He set up a target at an extended range with difficult lighting conditions and asked Sarah to demonstrate proper shooting form for the benefit of soldiers who were struggling with their marksmanship. Sarah approached the demonstration with her usual quiet competence, but Kim noticed that she was paying attention to factors that most soldiers wouldn't consider. She checked wind conditions, adjusted for the lighting angle, and made subtle modifications to her shooting position that demonstrated advanced understanding of external ballistics. When she fired, her shot struck the center of the target with precision that would have been impressive for an experienced marksman. "Nice shot, Chun," Kim commented, carefully observing her reaction. That was some pretty advanced technique for someone with just hunting experience. Sarah's response was characteristically modest. "My father was a good teacher, Sergeant." Kim didn't push for more details, but he made a mental note that Sarah Chun's background probably included more military experience than her personnel file indicated. He also decided that Rodriguez's assessment of her capabilities was not just wrong but potentially harmful to unit effectiveness. A soldier with Sarah's apparent abilities was being wasted in her current role and mistreated by leadership that couldn't recognize her value. The tension between Rodriguez's perception and Sarah's reality continued to build as weeks passed. Rodriguez's criticism became more personal and more public, while Sarah's actual performance remained consistently excellent across all objective measures. The disconnect was becoming obvious to anyone who paid attention to facts rather than assumptions, but military hierarchy made it difficult for subordinates to challenge Rodriguez's judgment directly. The situation was approaching a breaking point that would force Sarah to make difficult decisions about how much of her true background she was willing to reveal. Rodriguez's next escalation would push the conflict beyond the realm of training exercises and personality conflicts into territory that would demand more decisive action from everyone involved. As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, she held the medal in her hands for longer than usual, feeling its weight and thinking about the responsibilities it represented. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve her country. But the form that service would take was becoming less certain with each passing day. The quiet soldier who had hoped to complete her assignment without drawing attention was discovering that sometimes service required stepping into the light, regardless of personal preferences or comfort levels. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything for everyone involved, though none of them yet realized how dramatically their understanding of courage, competence, and service was about to be transformed. The breaking point came on a humid Tuesday morning when Rodriguez decided that subtle humiliation wasn't achieving the results he wanted. Sarah's continued presence in his unit felt like a personal affront to his judgment and her quiet competence. In the face of his criticism was beginning to make him look ineffective in front of the other soldiers. It was time for more direct action. Rodriguez had spent the previous evening reviewing Sarah's training records, looking for ammunition he could use to build a compelling case for her removal from the unit. What he found frustrated him even more. Sarah's scores met or exceeded every minimum standard. Her physical fitness tests showed consistent performance in the acceptable range. Her written examinations demonstrated solid understanding of military procedures and protocols. On paper, she was exactly the kind of soldier the Army wanted to retain. But Rodriguez knew that paperwork didn't tell the whole story. Numbers couldn't. capture the intangible qualities that separated real soldiers from people who were simply going through the motions. Leadership presence, combat instincts, the ability to inspire confidence in teammates during high-stress situations. These were the qualities that mattered when lives were on the line, and Rodriguez was convinced that Sarah Chun lacked all of them. The opportunity he'd been waiting for came during the weekly unit briefing, when Colonel Patricia Morrison announced that Fort Braxton would be hosting the inter-base military skills competition in 3 weeks. Teams from 5 different installations would compete in events designed to showcase various aspects of military readiness, from physical fitness challenges to tactical problem-solving exercises. The competition would be observed by senior military leadership from across the region, making it an important opportunity for units to demonstrate their capabilities. Rodriguez saw this as the perfect chance to prove his point about Sarah's inadequacy. In a controlled training environment, her deficiencies might not be immediately obvious to casual observers, but under the pressure of competition with representatives from other bases watching and unit pride on the line, her true limitations would become impossible to hide. "Chun," Rodriguez announced during the formation following the briefing, his voice carrying across the assembled soldiers. "You'll be representing our unit in the individual marksmanship competition." The announcement landed like a bomb among the soldiers. Marksmanship competitions were typically reserved for the unit's best shooters, soldiers who had demonstrated exceptional ability and who could be counted on to represent their installation with distinction. Selecting Sarah seemed like either a massive error in judgment or a deliberate setup for failure. Sarah felt the weight of every stare as soldiers processed the unexpected announcement. She understood immediately what Rodriguez was attempting to accomplish. By placing her in a high-visibility competitive situation where failure would be public and undeniable, he was creating the perfect scenario to justify his assessment of her abilities. Her failure would validate his judgment and provide clear grounds for recommending her removal from the unit. "Drill Sergeant," Sarah replied with careful military courtesy. "I'm honored by the selection, but perhaps someone with more competitive experience would better represent the unit." Rodriguez's smile was cold and predatory. "Are you refusing a direct assignment, Chun? Because that would be insubordination, and insubordination has consequences." The trap was perfectly constructed. Accepting the assignment meant almost certain public humiliation in front of senior leadership from multiple military installations. Refusing the assignment could be interpreted as disobedience, providing immediate grounds for disciplinary action. Either choice would accomplish Rodriguez's goal of removing her from the unit, just through different mechanisms. Sarah recognized the impossible position she had been placed in, but she also understood that Rodriguez had made a critical error. By making the conflict this public and this official, he had created a situation where her response would be witnessed and documented by multiple people. If she succeeded in the competition, Rodriguez's judgment would be publicly questioned. If she failed, she would at least fail while attempting to serve her unit, rather than avoiding responsibility. "No, Drill Sergeant. I'll represent the unit to the best of my ability." Rodriguez's satisfaction was visible to everyone present. In his mind, he had just guaranteed Sarah's removal from the military, while making it appear to be the result of her own inadequacies rather than his personal vendetta. The other soldiers exchanged glances, many of them recognizing the unfairness of the situation, but uncertain about what, if anything, they could do to help. Specialist Walsh felt a surge of anger at the obvious manipulation, but she also felt something else, curiosity about how Sarah would respond to this challenge. Over the past weeks, Walsh had continued to observe Sarah's performance and had become convinced that there was much more to her story than anyone understood. Sarah's reaction to Rodriguez's announcement was characteristic, calm acceptance without visible emotion, but Walsh thought she detected something else underneath the surface composure. That evening, Walsh found Sarah in the armory, methodically cleaning her assigned rifle with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to every task. The other soldiers had avoided the area, perhaps sensing that Sarah needed space to process what had happened, or perhaps uncomfortable with being associated with someone who had been so publicly targeted for failure. "That was a setup, Walsh," said without preamble, settling onto a nearby bench. "Rodriguez is trying to get you thrown out, and he's using the competition to do it." Sarah continued working on her rifle, her movements steady and precise. "I'm aware of the situation. Are you also aware that you're going to be competing against some of the best marksmen from 5 different bases? These aren't regular soldiers who happen to shoot well. These are specialists who have been training for competitions like this for years." Sarah paused in her cleaning, looking up at Walsh with an expression that was difficult to read. "Are you suggesting I should be concerned about the competition?" The question caught Walsh off guard. There was something in Sarah's tone that didn't match her usual modest demeanor. It wasn't arrogance or boastfulness, but rather a quiet confidence that seemed to come from some deep well of experience that Walsh couldn't quite identify. "I'm suggesting that Rodriguez has put you in an impossible situation, and I'm wondering if you have a plan for dealing with it." Sarah returned to her rifle maintenance, but her voice when she spoke carried a quality that Walsh had never heard before. "Drill Sergeant Rodriguez has made certain assumptions about my capabilities based on limited information. The competition will provide an opportunity to test whether those assumptions are accurate." Walsh felt a chill of anticipation run down her spine. Sarah wasn't talking like someone who's afraid of failure. She was talking like someone who had experience with high-stakes competitions and was confident in her ability to perform when it mattered. For the first time, Walsh began to wonder if Rodriguez might have made a serious miscalculation. "Sarah," Walsh said, using her first name for the first time since they had met, "who are you really?" The question hung in the air between them. For a long moment, Sarah's hands stilled on her rifle, and Walsh could see internal conflict playing across her features. Finally, Sarah looked up and met Walsh's eyes directly. "I'm someone who believes that actions speak louder than words. In 3 weeks, we'll see whether that belief is justified." Word of Sarah's selection for the marksmanship competition spread through Fort Braxton like wildfire, but the reactions were more complex than Rodriguez had anticipated. While some soldiers shared his skepticism about Sarah's abilities, others began to question why he had made such an unusual choice. Selecting an unproven soldier for a high-profile competition seemed like either poor judgment or a deliberate attempt at sabotage. Sergeant Kim heard about the selection from multiple sources before the day was over. His first reaction was concern for Sarah, who had impressed him with her shooting abilities, but who would now be facing competition from marksmen with years of specialized training. His second reaction was anger at Rodriguez for putting a soldier in a position where failure seemed almost inevitable. Kim decided to approach Sarah the next day during regular range training. He found her practicing with her usual quiet intensity, but he noticed that she had made several adjustments to her shooting position that demonstrated more advanced technique than he had previously observed. Her shot groupings were tighter than ever, and she was taking more time between shots, suggesting that she was preparing for precision shooting rather than the volume shooting that characterized most military training. "Chun," Kim called out, during a break in the exercise, "can I speak with you privately?" They walked to a quiet area of the range where their conversation wouldn't be overheard by other soldiers. Kim chose his words carefully, aware that he was about to venture into territory that could be seen as undermining Rodriguez's authority. "I heard about your selection for the competition. I want you to know that if you need additional training, time or coaching, I'm willing to work with you during off hours." Sarah studied his face, recognizing genuine concern rather than pity or condescension. "I appreciate the offer, Sergeant. What made you think I might need additional preparation?" Kim hesitated, uncertain about how direct he should be. The competition level is going to be significantly higher than anything you've experienced here. These are soldiers who compete professionally, who have access to specialized equipment and training that we don't provide in basic military instruction. I understand the level of competition, Sarah replied. What I'm curious about is why you think I might be able to compete at that level with additional training. The question forced Kim to articulate observations he had been making subconsciously for weeks. Your shooting technique is more advanced than your file suggests it should be. You make adjustments and corrections that indicate experience beyond recreational hunting. And your consistency suggests muscle memory that comes from extensive practice. Sarah nodded slowly, appreciating Kim's careful observation and professional assessment. Your offer of additional training time is generous, but I don't think it will be necessary. However, I would appreciate access to the range during off hours for personal practice. Kim agreed to provide the access, but he left the conversation with more questions than answers. Sarah's confidence wasn't the false bravado of someone who didn't understand what they were facing. It was the quiet assurance of someone who had faced similar challenges before and was confident in their preparation. Rodriguez's campaign against Sarah intensified as the competition approached. He seemed to view the 3-week preparation period as an opportunity to document additional evidence of her inadequacy. During training exercises, he would position himself to observe her performance closely, looking for any sign of stress or struggle that he could interpret as proof that she was overwhelmed by the pressure. Instead, Rodriguez found himself increasingly frustrated by Sarah's steady performance. She completed every assigned task with the same methodical competence she had always displayed. Her physical fitness scores remained consistent. Her weapons maintenance continued to exceed standards. Most infuriatingly, she seemed completely unaffected by the pressure of the upcoming competition. Rodriguez decided that if Sarah wasn't going to crack under normal training pressure, he would need to create additional stress. He began assigning her extra duties that would limit her preparation time for the competition. Equipment inventories, facility maintenance, administrative tasks, anything that would keep her busy during hours when she might otherwise be practicing. "Chun," Rodriguez announced during one evening formation, "you're assigned to complete a full inventory of the unit's communications equipment tonight. I want a detailed report on my desk by 0600 tomorrow." The assignment was both unnecessary and time-consuming, clearly designed to interfere with Sarah's preparation. The other soldiers recognized the unfairness immediately, but military hierarchy prevented them from objecting directly. However, several soldiers began finding ways to assist with Sarah's extra duties, completing portions of assignments or providing information that would speed her work. Walsh organized an informal support network among the soldiers who had come to respect Sarah's quiet competence. Without making their assistance obvious to Rodriguez, they began ensuring that Sarah's extra duties were completed quickly and efficiently, freeing her to focus on competition preparation. The solidarity was unprecedented in Walsh's experience, representing a level of unit cohesion that typically took months to develop. Sarah was deeply moved by her fellow soldiers' willingness to help, but she was also careful not to let their assistance become too obvious. Rodriguez was looking for any excuse to expand his campaign beyond her, to include soldiers who supported her. She accepted help when it was offered, but she also made sure to complete her share of the work without creating additional burden for others. As the competition date approached, Rodriguez's confidence in his strategy began to waver. Sarah's steady performance and the obvious support she enjoyed from other soldiers was creating a narrative that didn't match his assessment of her character. He had expected her to crumble under pressure, to provide clear evidence that she wasn't suitable for military service. Instead, she seemed to be thriving in spite of the additional challenges he had created. Rodriguez decided that he needed to escalate his approach one more time before the competition. During a unit meeting 2 weeks before the event, he announced a change in the selection process. that would increase the pressure on Sarah while providing him with additional opportunities to document her failures. Given the importance of this competition to our unit's reputation, Rodriguez announced, "I've decided that Chun will need to qualify for her position on the team through a preliminary competition against other soldiers from our unit. If she can't outshoot our own people, she certainly can't be expected to compete against the best marksmen from other installations." The announcement created immediate controversy among the soldiers. The original selection had been Rodriguez's decision, made without any qualification process. Creating a new requirement specifically for Sarah seemed like obvious harassment, designed to provide him with a face-saving way to remove her from the team if she failed to meet an arbitrary new standard. Sarah recognized the trap immediately. Rodriguez was betting that she couldn't outperform the unit's experienced marksmen in a direct competition. If she failed to qualify, he could claim that he had discovered her inadequacy through proper testing rather than personal bias. If she somehow succeeded in qualifying, he would have documented evidence of her abilities that he could use to argue that her previous performance had been deliberately restrained. "When will this qualification take place?" Sarah asked her, voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow morning, 0800 hours, Rodriguez replied. "Range time is limited before the competition, so we need to settle this question quickly." The short notice was obviously intentional, designed to prevent Sarah from having time to prepare or practice. Rodriguez was gambling that under pressure, with little time to get ready, Sarah's true limitations would become obvious to everyone present. That evening, Sarah made a decision that she had been avoiding for weeks. She retrieved the medal from its hiding place and held it in her hands, feeling its familiar weight and thinking about the responsibilities it represented. Tomorrow's qualification would determine not just whether she could compete in the interbase competition, but whether she could continue serving her country in the way she had chosen. The medal had been awarded for actions that she rarely allowed herself to remember in detail. 3 years earlier, during a mission that officially never happened at a location that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, Sarah had provided precision overwatch for a rescue operation that saved the lives of 7 American hostages. Working alone in hostile territory for 18 hours, she had eliminated 13 enemy combatants at ranges exceeding 600 meters while remaining undetected by a numerically superior force. The mission had been successful beyond all expectations, but the psychological cost had been enormous. Each shot had been necessary to save American lives, but each shot had also ended someone else's life. The weight of those decisions, the isolation of the mission, and the classified nature of her service had combined to create emotional burdens that she was still learning to carry. Sarah had requested transfer to conventional military service, partly to find peace in routine duties that didn't require life or death decisions, and partly to continue serving her country in a way that built rather than destroyed. She had hoped to complete her remaining military obligation quietly, without drawing attention to her specialized background or combat experience. Rodriguez's harassment had forced her to reconsider those plans. Tomorrow's qualification would require her to demonstrate abilities that would inevitably lead to questions about her background. But the alternative, allowing Rodriguez's false narrative to define her service, was becoming unacceptable. Sarah carefully returned the medal to its hiding place and began preparing her equipment for the next day's shooting. For the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, she allowed herself to think like the precision marksman she had trained to become rather than the anonymous soldier she had been trying to be. The qualification was scheduled for early morning, when lighting conditions would be challenging and wind patterns unpredictable. Rodriguez had selected 5 of the unit's best marksmen to compete against Sarah, soldiers with years of shooting experience and numerous competition victories. The format would be simple. Each shooter would fire 10 rounds at targets placed at increasing distances, with scores calculated based on accuracy and consistency. Word of the competition had spread throughout Fort Braxton, drawing spectators who were curious about the unusual circumstances surrounding Sarah's selection. Soldiers from other units, range personnel, and even some officers had found reasons to be in the area during the scheduled qualification time. The pressure was exactly what Rodriguez had hoped to create. Sergeant Kim arrived early to oversee the range setup and ensure that the competition would be conducted fairly. He was troubled by the obvious harassment that Sarah was facing, but he was also professionally curious about how she would perform under direct competitive pressure. His observations of her shooting abilities suggested that she might surprise everyone, including Rodriguez. The 5 competing soldiers arrived in formation, joking and displaying the easy confidence of marksmen who had competed successfully. For years, they treated the qualification as a routine exercise, an opportunity to demonstrate skills that they had honed through extensive practice and competition experience. None of them expected serious competition from the quiet soldier, who had been the target of Rodriguez's criticism for weeks. Sarah arrived precisely on time, carrying her assigned rifle and ammunition in the same methodical way she approached every task. Her expression was calm and focused, showing no signs of nervousness or anxiety about the competition ahead. She checked her equipment with practiced efficiency, making small adjustments that demonstrated familiarity with the weapon system that went beyond basic military training. Rodriguez positioned himself where he could observe Sarah's performance closely, anticipating the moment when pressure would reveal her true limitations. He had prepared remarks for after her inevitable failure, comments that would emphasize the importance of realistic self-assessment and proper respect for military specialties that required years of training to master. Kim called the competitors to the firing line and explained the course of fire. 10 rounds at 200 meters, 10 rounds at 400 meters, and 10 rounds at 600 meters. Each shot would be scored individually, with the highest cumulative score determining the winner. The format was standard for military marksmanship competitions, designed to test both accuracy and consistency across varying ranges. Sarah took her position on the firing line with quiet confidence that surprised the other competitors. Her stance was textbook perfect, but more than that, it was natural and relaxed in a way that suggested extensive experience. She made minor adjustments to her position and sight picture that demonstrated understanding of external factors, like wind direction and lighting conditions. The first string of fire began with Sarah shooting in the middle position among the 6 competitors. The range fell silent except for the crack of rifles as each marksman fired their 10 rounds at the 200-meter target. Sarah's shooting rhythm was deliberate and consistent, each shot carefully placed after brief periods of observation and adjustment. When the first string was complete and targets were scored, a murmur of surprise ran through the observing soldiers. Sarah had achieved a perfect score, placing all 10 rounds within the high-scoring inner rings of the target. Her performance was matched by only one other competitor, a staff sergeant who had won multiple inter-service competitions. Rodriguez felt his first twinge of unease, but he reminded himself that 200 meters was a relatively short range where basic shooting fundamentals could produce good results. The real test would come as distances increased and external factors became more challenging to manage. The 400-meter targets were reset, and the competition continued. At this range, wind drift and bullet drop became significant factors, requiring more advanced shooting skills. Most military marksmen struggled to maintain high scores at 400 meters, and Rodriguez expected this to be where Sarah's limitations would become obvious. Sarah approached the 400-meter string with the same methodical calm she had displayed at the shorter range. She took more time between shots, carefully observing wind indicators and making subtle adjustments to her aim point. Her breathing control was precise, and her trigger manipulation was smooth and consistent. When the targets were scored, Sarah had again achieved a perfect score. Her shot grouping was tighter than any of the other competitors, demonstrating precision that bordered on mechanical consistency. The observing soldiers fell completely silent, recognizing that they were witnessing shooting that exceeded normal expectations. Rodriguez's confidence began to evaporate as he realized that Sarah wasn't struggling with the competition pressure. If anything, she seemed to be more focused and competent than he had ever observed during routine training. The possibility that he had made a serious error in judgment began to creep into his consciousness. The 600-meter targets represented the ultimate test of marksmanship skill. At this range, minor errors in technique, equipment, or environmental assessment would result in missed targets and low scores. Even experienced competition shooters sometimes struggled to maintain accuracy at 600 meters, particularly under the pressure of formal competition. Sarah's preparation for the final string was noticeably different from her approach to the shorter ranges. She spent several minutes observing wind indicators across the range, noting changes in vegetation movement and mirage patterns that indicated shifting air currents. Her equipment adjustments were more extensive, suggesting understanding of ballistic principles that went well beyond basic military training. When she finally settled into her shooting position, Sarah's entire demeanor had shifted. The quiet competence that had characterized her performance throughout her time at Fort Braxton had transformed into something approaching professional intensity. She was no longer the modest soldier trying to avoid attention. She was a precision marksman preparing to demonstrate abilities that had been honed through years of specialized training and real-world application. Sarah's first shot at 600 meters struck the center of the target with an accuracy that drew gasps from the observing soldiers. Her second shot landed within inches of the first, establishing a pattern that would define the remainder of the string. Shot after shot, she placed bullets with mechanical precision that defied normal human limitations. When the final scores were tallied, Sarah had achieved something that none of the observers had thought possible. She had fired 30 rounds at varying distances under competitive pressure and had achieved a perfect score, placing every bullet within the highest scoring rings of the target. Her performance wasn't just better than the other competitors. It was better than most observers had ever witnessed. The silence that followed the score announcement was profound and uncomfortable. Rodriguez stood frozen, realizing that his assumptions about Sarah's abilities had been completely wrong. The other competitors looked stunned, recognizing that they had just been outshot by someone whose capabilities exceeded their own by a significant margin. Kim approached Sarah with a mixture of professional admiration and personal curiosity. "Chun, that was extraordinary shooting. I've never seen consistency like that in 20 years of running competitive ranges." Sarah's response was characteristically modest, but there was something different in her bearing now. The pretense of average ability had been stripped away by the demands of competition, revealing glimpses of the specialized soldier she actually was. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate my commitment to representing the unit effectively." Rodriguez found his voice with difficulty, realizing that he had to respond to a situation that had developed completely contrary to his expectations. "Well, I suppose you've qualified for the team, Chun." The understatement was so obvious that several soldiers actually laughed, breaking the tension that had built during the competition. Sarah had not just qualified. She had demonstrated abilities that suggested she might be competitive against the best marksmen from other military installations. As the crowd of observers began to disperse, Walsh approached Sarah with a mixture of awe and curiosity. That wasn't beginner's luck or good coaching. That was professional-level shooting from someone with extensive training and experience. Sarah met Walsh's eyes directly, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, she didn't deflect or minimize the implications of the question. "You're right, it wasn't beginner's luck." The admission hung in the air between them, representing a fundamental shift in how Sarah was willing to present herself to her fellow soldiers. The competition had forced her to reveal capabilities that she had been hiding, but it had also demonstrated that her fellow soldiers deserved more honesty about who she was and what she had experienced. Rodriguez walked away from the range feeling as though his entire understanding of leadership and personnel assessment had been called into question. Sarah Chun wasn't the weak soldier he had assumed her to be. She was something else entirely. And he had spent weeks humiliating someone whose abilities exceeded his own understanding. The implications of his error were beginning to dawn on him as word of Sarah's performance spread throughout Fort Braxton. By evening, the story of the qualification competition would be known throughout the installation, along with the circumstances that had led to it. Rodriguez's judgment and leadership would be evaluated based on how he had treated a soldier whose capabilities were now obviously exceptional. Sarah returned to her quarters that evening, knowing that her time of anonymity at Fort Braxton was over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new expectations based on the abilities she had revealed. The competition had forced her to choose between maintaining her low profile and defending her honor as a soldier, and she had chosen honor. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah held her medal one more time, thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. The specialized training, the combat missions, the decision to seek conventional service, and now the revelation of abilities she had tried to keep hidden. Each phase had taught her something different about duty, sacrifice, and the various ways that soldiers could serve their country. The inter-base competition was still 2 weeks away, but Sarah knew that the real test had already begun. She would be representing not just her unit, but her own integrity as a soldier. The quiet phase of her service at Fort Braxton was over, and whatever came next would require her to find new ways to balance her desire for anonymity with her obligation to serve effectively. Rodriguez's miscalculation had created consequences that neither of them had fully anticipated, but those consequences would ultimately serve the interests of truth and justice in ways that would become clear only with time. The morning of the inter-base competition dawned crisp and clear, with perfect conditions for precision shooting. Fort Braxton buzzed with activity as visiting teams from 4 other military installations arrived with their equipment and support personnel. The competition had attracted attention from senior military leadership across the region, with several generals and colonels planning to observe the events personally. Sarah stood at her quarters window, watching the convoy of vehicles arrive, and feeling the weight of expectation that had built over the past 2 weeks. Since the qualification competition, her status within the unit had shifted dramatically. Soldiers who had previously ignored her now sought her advice on shooting techniques. Officers who had never acknowledged her existence were suddenly interested in her training background and experience. The transformation was both gratifying and uncomfortable. Sarah had spent months cultivating anonymity, finding peace in routine duties that didn't require her to confront the memories and responsibilities that came with her specialized background. Now she was thrust into a spotlight that would inevitably lead to questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. Rodriguez had been conspicuously absent from most interactions with Sarah since the qualification. His public humiliation at witnessing her exceptional performance had created a situation where he couldn't continue his harassment without appearing petty and unprofessional. However, Sarah could sense his resentment and knew that he was looking for ways to salvage his authority and reputation. Colonel Morrison had requested a private meeting with Sarah the day before the competition, ostensibly to discuss her preparation and expectations. The conversation had been professional and supportive, but Sarah detected undertones that suggested Morrison suspected there was more to her background than her personnel file indicated. "Chun," Morrison had said during their meeting, "your performance during the qualification was remarkable. It suggests training and experience that goes beyond what we typically see in soldiers at your level. Is there anything about your background that might help us better understand your capabilities?" Sarah had deflected the question with carefully chosen words about family hunting experience and natural aptitude, but she could see that Morrison wasn't entirely convinced. The colonel was experienced enough to recognize the difference between recreational shooting skills and the kind of precision marksmanship that Sarah had demonstrated. Now, as Sarah prepared her equipment for the competition, she reflected on the increasingly difficult balance between maintaining her privacy and serving effectively. The qualification had forced her to reveal enough of her abilities to compete credibly, but it had also opened doors to scrutiny that she had been hoping to avoid. The competition format was more complex than the simple qualification that had preceded it. Multiple events would test different aspects of marksmanship skill, from rapid-fire exercises to precision shooting at extended ranges. The culminating event would be a stress shoot, where competitors would be required to engage targets while dealing with simulated combat conditions, designed to test their ability to perform under pressure. Sarah understood that each event would reveal more about her background and training. The other competitors were accomplished marksmen with years of specialized experience, and competing effectively against them would require her to draw on skills that she had acquired through methods that couldn't be easily explained through conventional military training. Walsh approached Sarah as she completed her equipment preparation, carrying her own gear for the team events that would supplement the individual competitions. The support Sarah had received from her fellow soldiers had continued to grow, creating a sense of unit pride and solidarity that extended beyond the competition itself. "How are you feeling about today?" Walsh asked, settling her equipment beside Sarah's. Sarah considered the question carefully. Her feelings about the competition were complicated by the broader implications of what her participation would reveal. "I'm prepared to represent the unit to the best of my ability. Whatever happens today, I want to make sure that Fort Braxton is represented with honor." Walsh nodded, recognizing the underlying tension in Sarah's response. "You know that regardless of how the competition turns out, you've already proven that Rodriguez was completely wrong about your capabilities. That matters to all of us." The acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than Walsh could have known. Over the past weeks, the support of her fellow soldiers had helped her understand that service could take many forms, and that the relationships built through shared commitment were often as important as individual achievements. The opening ceremony for the competition was held in Fort Braxton's main assembly hall, with representatives from all 5 participating installations presenting their teams to the assembled military leadership. Sarah found herself positioned with the Fort Braxton marksmanship team, wearing the dress uniform that Rodriguez had once mocked as ill-fitting and inappropriate. General Rebecca Hayes, the senior officer overseeing the competition, delivered remarks emphasizing the importance of marksmanship excellence in modern military operations. Her presence added gravity to the event, as Hayes was known throughout the military for her combat leadership and her support for programs that identified and developed exceptional talent. Sarah listened to the general's remarks while maintaining the military bearing that had become second nature through years of service. However, she noticed that General Hayes seemed to be paying particular attention to the Fort Braxton team, her gaze lingering on Sarah with an expression that suggested recognition or curiosity. The first event of the competition was rapid-fire marksmanship, where competitors would engage multiple targets in sequence under strict time limits. The exercise was designed to test not just accuracy, but also target acquisition speed and the quietest ability to maintain precision while working quickly. Sarah approached the rapid-fire exercise with the same methodical preparation that had characterized her qualification performance. She studied the target array carefully, planning her engagement sequence to minimize movement time while maintaining optimal shooting positions. Her preparation was more systematic than most other competitors, suggesting experience with tactical shooting that went beyond recreational marksmanship. When the exercise began, Sarah's performance was immediately distinctive. While other competitors rushed between targets, sometimes sacrificing accuracy for speed, Sarah moved with efficient precision that maximized both speed and accuracy. Her target engagement was smooth and deliberate, each shot carefully placed. Despite the time pressure, the results of the rapid-fire exercise created a stir among the observing officials. Sarah had achieved the highest score among all competitors, but more significantly, her technique during the exercise had demonstrated tactical proficiency that was unusual for a soldier serving in a conventional infantry role. Sergeant Major William Torres, the senior enlisted advisor to General Hayes, approached Sergeant Kim during the break between events. Torres was known for his ability to identify exceptional soldiers and his interest in ensuring that talent was properly recognized and utilized. "Kim," Torres said quietly, "where did Chun receive her advanced marksmanship training?" Her technique during that exercise suggested specialized instruction that goes beyond standard military marksmanship programs. Kim had been expecting this question since Sarah's qualification performance, but he still struggled with how to answer honestly without revealing information that Sarah might prefer to keep private. According to her file, she had civilian hunting experience before enlisting. But you're right that her performance suggests more extensive training. Torres nodded thoughtfully. I've seen a lot of competitive shooters over the years, and Chun's approach isn't typical of civilian-trained marksmen. Her movement patterns and target engagement sequence suggest tactical training designed for real-world application rather than competitive shooting. The conversation was interrupted by the call for competitors to prepare for the precision shooting event, but Torres made a mental note to continue his inquiry after the competition concluded. Something about Sarah's background didn't align with her current position, and identifying exceptional talent was too important to ignore. The precision shooting event required competitors to engage targets at distances ranging from 400 to 800 meters, with scoring based on accuracy and consistency across multiple ranges. The challenge was increased by variable wind conditions and challenging lighting that tested even experienced marksmen's ability to read environmental factors. Sarah's preparation for the precision event was notably different from her approach to the rapid-fire exercise. She spent considerable time observing wind indicators and mirage patterns, making calculations that demonstrated understanding of external ballistics that exceeded basic military training. Her equipment adjustments were precise and purposeful, suggesting familiarity with advanced shooting techniques. General Hayes positioned herself where she could observe Sarah's performance directly. Something about the young soldier's bearing and technique had caught her attention, and she was curious about what kind of training had produced such evident competence. Hayes had commanded units that included some of the military's most elite marksmen, and she recognized signs of advanced training when she saw them. Sarah's performance during the precision event was flawless. She engaged targets at each range with mechanical consistency, placing shots with accuracy that drew admiration from competitors and observers alike. Her shooting rhythm was deliberate and controlled, each shot the result of careful calculation and precise execution. When the scores were announced, Sarah had again achieved the highest total among all competitors. More significantly, her score exceeded the previous competition record by a substantial margin, establishing a new standard that would be difficult for future competitors to match. The reaction from the other competitors was a mixture of respect and curiosity. These were soldiers who had devoted years to developing their marksmanship skills, and they recognized that Sarah's performance represented abilities that were exceptional by any measure. Several approached her during the break to offer congratulations and to ask about her training background. Rodriguez watched Sarah's success with growing unease. Each exceptional performance made his previous treatment of her appear more obviously wrong, damaging his credibility and authority. He was beginning to realize that his error in judgment might have consequences that extended beyond this single competition. The final event of the individual competition was the stress shoot, designed to test competitors' ability to maintain marksmanship accuracy while dealing with simulated combat conditions. Competitors would be required to engage targets while wearing full combat equipment after completing physical challenges designed to elevate heart rate and stress levels. The stress shoot was Sarah's opportunity to demonstrate the combat application of her marksmanship skills, but it was also the event most likely to reveal the true extent of her specialized training. The exercise format closely resembled actual combat scenarios, and performing well would require her to draw on experience that couldn't be explained through civilian hunting or conventional military training. Sarah approached the stress shoot with visible confidence that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy displayed by most other competitors. She donned her combat equipment with practiced efficiency, making adjustments that demonstrated familiarity with tactical gear that went beyond basic military issue. The physical challenges that preceded the shooting portion of the exercise were designed to simulate the exhaustion and stress that soldiers might experience in combat situations. Competitors were required to complete obstacle courses, carry heavy equipment over long distances, and perform tasks that would elevate their heart rate and degrade their fine motor control. Sarah completed the physical challenges with the same methodical efficiency that characterized all her performance. While other competitors showed obvious signs of fatigue and stress, Sarah appeared to be managing the physical demands without significant difficulty. Her breathing remained controlled, and her movements stayed precise despite the challenging conditions. When the shooting portion of the stress shoot began, Sarah's performance was immediately distinctive. Despite the simulated combat conditions and the physical stress of the preceding challenges, her accuracy remained virtually unchanged from her performance during the precision event. She engaged targets with the same mechanical consistency that had characterized her shooting throughout the competition. General Hayes watched Sarah's performance with growing recognition. The young soldier's ability to maintain precision accuracy under simulated combat stress was characteristic of elite military marksmen who had received specialized training and combat experience. Her technique wasn't just competent, it was professional grade performance from someone with real-world application of these skills. When the stress shoot concluded, Sarah had again achieved the highest score among all competitors. Her performance under pressure had been so superior that it established her not just as the winner of the individual marksmanship competition, but as someone whose abilities exceeded normal expectations by a significant margin. The awards ceremony was scheduled for late afternoon, giving officials time to tabulate final scores and prepare recognition for the outstanding performers. Sarah used the break to clean her equipment and reflect on the day's events, knowing that her performance had created attention and expectations that would be difficult to manage. Sergeant Major Torres approached Sarah during the preparation for the awards ceremony, accompanied by General Hayes. The presence of such senior leadership indicated that this conversation would be more than casual congratulations for competitive success. Private Chun, General Hayes began, "Your performance today has been extraordinary. Your scores have established new competition records, and your technique has demonstrated proficiency that suggests advanced training and experience. I'm curious about your background and how you developed these exceptional capabilities." Sarah recognized that this was the moment she had been hoping to avoid, but had known was inevitable. Her performance during the competition had been too exceptional to explain through the limited background information in her official file. Senior leadership was asking direct questions that would require more complete answers than she had been providing. "General," Sarah replied carefully, "I've had extensive shooting experience through family training and personal practice. I've been fortunate to learn from knowledgeable instructors who emphasized precision and consistency." General Hayes studied Sarah's face, recognizing the diplomatic non-answer for what it was. "Private, I've been in the military for 25 years. and I've worked with some of our most elite marksmen. Your performance today wasn't the result of civilian hunting experience. Your technique, your equipment familiarity, and especially your performance under stress suggests specialized military training and possibly combat experience. The directness of the general's observation left Sarah with limited options for deflection. She could continue to maintain the fiction of civilian-only experience, but doing so would be dishonest to a senior officer who clearly recognized the truth. Alternatively, she could acknowledge her background and accept whatever consequences came from revealing information she had been trying to keep private. Sarah made her decision based on the military values of honesty and integrity that had guided her throughout her service. General, you're correct. My background includes specialized military training and combat experience that isn't reflected in my current assignment. General Hayes nodded, having suspected as much from observing Sarah's performance. Would you be willing to discuss that background? I'm particularly interested in understanding why someone with your evident capabilities is serving in a conventional infantry role rather than in a specialized marksmanship position. Sarah felt the weight of years of careful privacy being lifted as she prepared to acknowledge the experiences that had shaped her military service. General, I previously served with classified units conducting operations that aren't publicly acknowledged. My request for conventional assignment was based on personal preference for service that didn't require the specialized applications of these skills. The admission created immediate interest from both General Hayes and Sergeant Major Torres. Soldiers with classified operational backgrounds were typically retained in specialized roles where their experience and skills could be fully utilized. Requesting conventional service suggested either personal circumstances or experiences that had influenced Sarah's preferences in ways that weren't immediately obvious. Private Chun, Sergeant Major Torres interjected, soldiers with your level of demonstrated capability are valuable assets that the military needs to utilize effectively. Regardless of your personal preferences, we have an obligation to ensure that exceptional talent is properly employed. Sarah understood the implications of Torres's statement. Her performance during the competition had created a tension from senior leadership that would be difficult to deflect. The military's need for specialized talent would likely take precedence over her personal desire for anonymity and conventional service. General Hayes seemed to recognize Sarah's discomfort with the direction of the conversation. Private, I understand that there may be personal reasons for your current assignment preference. However, your performance today suggests capabilities that could benefit the military in ways that extend beyond your current role. Would you be willing to discuss potential assignments that might better utilize your abilities while respecting your preference for certain types of service? The question represented exactly the kind of compromise that Sarah had been hoping to avoid. She wanted to continue serving her country, but she also wanted to avoid assignments that would require her to confront the memories and responsibilities associated with her previous specialized service. The competition had forced her to reveal capabilities that made such compromise increasingly difficult to maintain. Before Sarah could respond, the conversation was interrupted by an announcement that the awards ceremony was beginning. The discussion of her background and future assignments would have to wait, but Sarah understood that the questions raised wouldn't simply disappear after the ceremony concluded. The awards ceremony was held on Fort Braxton's parade ground, with representatives from all participating units assembled to recognize outstanding performance during the competition. Sarah found herself positioned with the other individual award recipients, wearing the dress uniform that had once been the target of Rodriguez's mockery. When her name was announced as the overall individual marksmanship champion, Sarah stepped forward to receive recognition that felt both earned and complicated. The applause from the assembled soldiers was genuine and enthusiastic, reflecting respect for exceptional performance and unit pride in her achievement. General Hayes presented Sarah with the competition trophy and a certificate recognizing her record-setting performance. During the brief exchange, the general spoke quietly enough that only Sarah could hear her words. Private Chun, exceptional talent comes with exceptional responsibility. We'll continue our conversation about how best to honor both your preferences and your obligations to serve effectively. Sarah accepted the recognition with appropriate military courtesy, but she understood that the general's words represented more than casual congratulations. The competition had created opportunities and expectations that would require her to make difficult decisions about her future service. As the ceremony concluded and soldiers began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by fellow competitors and observers who wanted to offer congratulations and ask questions about her background and training. The attention was well-intentioned, but overwhelming for someone who had spent months trying to remain unnoticed. Walsh rescued Sarah from the crowd, creating space for her to collect her equipment and thoughts without dealing with constant questions and requests for shooting advice. The support was characteristic of the friendship that had developed between them, based on mutual respect and understanding that didn't require complete disclosure of personal backgrounds. "You realize that everything changes now," Walsh said as they walked toward the unit area. "There's no going back to being invisible after a performance like that." Sarah nodded, understanding that Walsh was right about the implications of the day's events. "I know. I'm just not sure I'm ready for whatever comes next." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Rodriguez, who had been conspicuously absent during the awards ceremony, but who now approached Sarah with an expression that suggested he was struggling with how to address the situation his earlier treatment had created. "Shun," Rodriguez said, his voice lacking the aggressive tone that had characterized most of his previous interactions with her. "I wanted to congratulate you on your performance today. Your achievement reflects well on the unit." The grudging acknowledgement was as close to an apology as Sarah expected to receive, but it also represented recognition from Rodriguez that his assessment of her capabilities had been completely wrong. His future treatment of her would need to reflect the reality of her abilities rather than his incorrect assumptions about her limitations. Sarah accepted Rodriguez's congratulations with professional courtesy, understanding that both of them would need to find ways to move forward from the conflict that had defined their relationship for months. The competition had resolved questions about her capabilities, but it had also created new challenges about how to serve effectively while maintaining some level of personal privacy. As evening approached and the visiting teams prepared to depart Fort Braxton, Sarah reflected on the day's events and their implications for her future service. The competition had forced her to reveal abilities that she had been trying to keep hidden, creating a tension and expectations that would be difficult to manage. However, it had also demonstrated that she could compete at the highest levels, while maintaining the integrity and professionalism that defined her approach to military service. The conversation with General Hayes would continue, and decisions about her future assignments would need to be made. Sarah understood that she would need to find ways to balance her personal preferences with her obligations to serve her country effectively, utilizing the specialized capabilities that the competition had revealed. The medal hidden in her quarters represented experiences and achievements that she wasn't ready to discuss publicly. But the competition had shown that some aspects of her background couldn't remain hidden indefinitely. The challenge would be finding ways to serve that honored both her past sacrifices and her current preferences for how that service should be applied. Tomorrow would bring new conversations and new decisions, but tonight Sarah could take satisfaction in representing her unit with honor and distinction. The competition had tested not just her marksmanship abilities, but also her commitment to excellence and service, and she had met those tests with the same integrity that had defined her military career. The quiet soldier who had once been mocked for her appearance had proven that true capability wasn't always visible on the surface. and that exceptional performance could emerge from the most unexpected places when circumstances demanded it. 3 days after the competition, General Hayes returned to Fort Braxton with a small team of senior officers and a classified personnel file that would change everything. Sarah was summoned to Colonel Morrison's office, where she found herself facing not just her immediate chain of command, but military leadership that included a Pentagon liaison and someone from the Army Special Operations Command. The meeting room felt smaller with so many high-ranking officials present. Sarah maintained her military bearing, but she could sense that this conversation would go far beyond the shooting competition that had triggered it. General Hayes held a thick folder that Sarah recognized as the type used for classified personnel records. "Private Chun," General Hayes began, "we've had the opportunity to review your complete military file, including the classified portions that weren't available to your current command structure. I think it's time we had a more complete conversation about your background and your future service." Sarah felt her carefully constructed privacy dissolving as Hayes opened the file. Inside was documentation of missions that officially never happened, commendations for actions that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, and most significantly, the paperwork authorizing the Medal of Honor that currently rested hidden in her quarters. According to this file, Hayes continued, "You were awarded the Medal of Honor for actions during Operation Silent Guardian, where you provided precision overwatch for a hostage rescue mission in hostile territory. The citation describes how you eliminated multiple enemy combatants at extreme range while remaining undetected for over 20 hours, ultimately saving the lives of 7 American hostages and their rescue team." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone in the room understood the significance of the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, awarded only for conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. Sarah had hoped to keep this recognition private, but circumstances had made that impossible. Colonel Morrison looked stunned. He had been commanding soldiers for 15 years and had never knowingly had a Medal of Honor recipient serving under his command, especially not one assigned to routine infantry duties. The implications for how Sarah had been treated, particularly by Rodriguez, were staggering. "Private Chun," Morrison said carefully, "why didn't this information appear in your standard personnel file? How is it possible that we've had a Medal of Honor recipient serving in our unit without knowing it?" Sarah had been dreading this question, but she understood that complete honesty was now required. "Sir, I requested that my decoration and combat service record be classified to allow me to serve in conventional roles without the attention that typically accompanies such recognition. I wanted to continue serving my country, but in ways that didn't require me to relive the experiences that earned the medal." General Hayes nodded with understanding. "The psychological evaluation in your file indicates that you experienced significant trauma during Operation Silent Guardian, not from the combat itself, but from the isolation and the weight of responsibility for so many lives. Your request for conventional service was approved as part of your recovery and reintegration process." The Pentagon liaison, a colonel whose name tag read Thompson, leaned forward. "Private Chun, the military has invested significant resources in your training and has a compelling interest in utilizing your capabilities effectively. While we respect your personal preferences, exceptional talent carries exceptional responsibility." Sarah recognized the direction this conversation was heading. Her performance at the competition had revealed abilities that the military couldn't ignore, regardless of her personal desire for anonymity. The question was whether there might be ways to serve that honored both her psychological needs and the military's requirement to use exceptional talent effectively. "What are you proposing?" Sarah asked. General Hayes smiled slightly. "We're proposing a new role that might address both sets of concerns. The Army is developing an advanced marksmanship training program designed to identify and develop exceptional shooting talent across all military specialties. We need someone with your combination of technical expertise and combat experience to lead curriculum development and instructor training. The proposal was intriguing but complicated. Teaching other soldiers would allow Sarah to use her specialized skills in ways that built rather than destroyed, which aligned with her personal values. However, it would also require her to discuss her background and experiences in ways that she had been avoiding. The position would be based here at Fort Braxton, has continued, allowing you to maintain connections with your current unit while taking on responsibilities more appropriate to your capabilities. You would be promoted to sergeant and given authority to develop training programs that could benefit thousands of soldiers throughout their careers. Sarah considered the proposal carefully. The opportunity to help other soldiers develop skills that might save their lives was appealing, and it would allow her to serve in ways that created rather than destroyed. However, it would also mean acknowledging her background publicly and accepting the attention that came with her Medal of Honor. "There's one more thing," Colonel Thompson added. "Drill Sergeant Rodriguez will be reassigned to a position where his approach to soldier development might be more appropriate. His treatment of you has been reviewed, and while no formal disciplinary action will be taken, his future assignments will reflect the lessons learned from this situation." The news about Rodriguez's reassignment was both satisfying and sobering. Sarah took no pleasure in his professional difficulties, but she was relieved that other soldiers wouldn't face the kind of harassment and misjudgment that had characterized her experience under his leadership. "I need time to consider the proposal," Sarah said finally. General Hayes nodded. "Take the time you need. However, I should mention that tomorrow morning, there will be a ceremony where you'll be publicly recognized for your competition performance, and your Medal of Honor will be acknowledged. The story has already begun to spread, and we believe it's better to control the narrative rather than let it develop on its own." Sarah felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. The privacy she had maintained for months was ending, but it was ending on terms that allowed her to shape how her story was told. The ceremony would mark the beginning of a new phase of her military service, one where her capabilities and achievements were acknowledged rather than hidden. That evening, Sarah removed the Medal of Honor from its hiding place for the last time. Tomorrow it would be displayed publicly, acknowledging sacrifices and achievements that she had never expected to discuss. She thought about the 7 hostages whose lives had been saved, the teammates who had depended on her precision, and the enemy combatants whose deaths had been necessary but never celebrated. Walsh found Sarah in the common area where she was, sitting quietly with the medal in her hands. The sight of the distinctive blue ribbon and star-shaped decoration was breathtaking, representing the highest level of military valor and sacrifice. "Is that real?" Walsh asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "It's real, and tomorrow everyone will know about it." Walsh sat down beside her friend, finally understanding the burden that Sarah had been carrying. The Medal of Honor wasn't just recognition. It was a lifetime reminder of actions taken under circumstances that most people couldn't imagine. No wonder Sarah had sought anonymity and conventional service. "Are you ready for people to know?" Walsh asked. Sarah considered the question. "I don't think anyone is ever ready for this kind of attention. But I'm tired of hiding who I am and what I've done. Maybe it's time to find ways to use these experiences to help other people." The next morning brought the ceremony that would transform Sarah's status at Fort Braxton permanently. The entire garrison was assembled, along with visiting officials and media representatives who would document the recognition of exceptional service. Sarah wore her dress uniform with the Medal of Honor displayed prominently, no longer hidden but acknowledged as the extraordinary recognition it represented. General Hayes delivered remarks that provided context for Sarah's recognition without revealing classified details about her combat service. The speech emphasized themes of hidden excellence, the importance of recognizing exceptional talent regardless of its packaging, and the military's commitment to developing and utilizing the capabilities of all soldiers. When Sarah stepped forward to receive formal recognition, the applause was thunderous and sustained. Soldiers who had served alongside her for months were seeing her clearly for the first time, understanding that they had been privileged to work with someone whose sacrifices and achievements exceeded their previous comprehension. Rodriguez was present at the ceremony, standing with the other drill sergeants, but visibly uncomfortable with the recognition being given to someone he had spent months belittling. The contrast between his previous treatment of Sarah and her actual achievements was obvious to everyone present, serving as a powerful lesson about the dangers of judging people based on superficial characteristics. After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by dozens of soldiers seeking to offer congratulations, ask questions about her experiences, and request guidance about their own military development. The attention was overwhelming but also meaningful, representing genuine respect and admiration rather than curiosity or celebrity seeking. Sergeant Kim approached Sarah during the reception that followed the ceremony. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for not recognizing your capabilities sooner. Your performance always suggested advanced training, but I never imagined the extent of your background." Sarah appreciated Kim's honesty and professionalism. "Sergeant, you treated me with respect and provided opportunities to demonstrate my abilities. That's all any soldier can ask for from their leadership." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of young soldiers who had been inspired by Sarah's story and wanted to learn from her experiences. Their enthusiasm and genuine desire to improve reminded Sarah of why she had chosen to continue serving despite the personal costs of her previous combat experience. Over the following weeks, Sarah began developing the advanced marksmanship training program that General Hayes had proposed. The work was challenging but fulfilling, allowing her to translate combat experience into educational content that could benefit soldiers throughout their careers. Her approach emphasized not just technical shooting skills, but also decision-making, stress management, and the psychological preparation necessary for effective performance under pressure. The program attracted attention from military installations across the country, with requests for Sarah to conduct training sessions and develop curricula for specialized units. Her reputation grew not just as an exceptional marksman, but as someone who could effectively transfer complex skills to other soldiers. Rodriguez's reassignment took him to a basic training facility, where his aggressive approach to soldier development was considered more appropriate for initial military instruction. The transfer was presented as a career development opportunity, but everyone understood that it represented consequences for his failure to recognize and develop exceptional talent. 6 months after the ceremony, Sarah received a letter from one of the soldiers who had completed her advanced training program. The soldier was deployed overseas and credited Sarah's instruction with helping him perform effectively during a combat engagement where precision shooting had been crucial. The letter represented exactly the kind of impact that Sarah had hoped to achieve through her new role. Sarah's story became part of Fort Braxton's institutional memory, serving as a reminder that exceptional capability often came in unexpected packages and that effective leadership required looking beyond surface appearances to recognize and develop hidden potential. New soldiers arriving at the installation heard about the quiet private who had turned out to be a Medal of Honor recipient, learning lessons about humility, respect, and the importance of never underestimating their fellow soldiers. The transformation was complete. Sarah Chun had evolved from an overlooked equipment technician to a recognized expert whose contributions were valued and utilized effectively. Her journey demonstrated that true service took many forms, and that sometimes the most important victories were won not through combat, but through the patient development of others, who would carry forward the lessons learned through sacrifice and dedication. The drill sergeant who had once mocked her uniform now served as an example of how assumptions and prejudices could blind leaders to the exceptional talent serving under their command. Sarah's story continued to inspire soldiers who understood that greatness often hid behind humble appearances, waiting for the right moment to emerge and serve something greater than itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.